right, and welcome back to Sam's Mini Workshop, where today we will be filming the final part of our How to Paint series involving Castellan Crowe. Today we will be working on painting the base of the model and then getting everything put together for the final assembly. So, without further ado, let's hop in and we'll finish up this model. So for today's video, like I said, we are going to work on completing the base for Castellan Crowe. And this is the base that the kit comes with. And it's a really good one. It's kind of like a demonic rubble base, for lack of a better word. And you can see that it essentially takes up almost the entirety of the base that we the basing disc that we put it on. But there are little bits of kind of some gap on the edges there that we want to first kind of fill in to complete the look before we kind of move on to painting the whole thing. We want it to look like a uniform base, right? And now there's tons and tons of different ways that we could go about filling this, right? One simple way might be to use like some basing glue or PVA glue, hobby glue, essentially, and you put this all around that kind of base, and then you use some sand to fill it in. So I've got some sand here. You could use hobby sand from a hobby store. This is sand from my garden. Really, any sand you would want to use is totally fine with that. And this is like a really quick, easy way to get your base done, right? You put the PVA glue on there, you sprinkle the sand around the outside, you let it set, and then you paint it. Totally fine. And what I do with a lot of my bases, especially for just like common soldiers and stuff like that. But we're going to do something a little bit different today, because we can. And so for that, we're actually going to create the base using some Milliput. And this is a 2-part epoxy putty, much like green stuff. And there's tons of different, epoxy putties out there that work great. One of the reasons that I like Milliput for basing and like environments and stuff like that is that it has a little bit more of a crumbly texture than like green stuff does, which makes it easy to kind of separate and push into like the nooks and crannies that would be on our base. So what we're going to do is get ourselves a small hunk of each of the sections here and try to make them roughly equal. And I would start out with less to begin with, and then you can always add more to it if you need to. That way you're not wasting like an unnecessary amount of your Milliput. It's not crazy expensive, but we spend enough money on this hobby. I don't want to spend more than we necessarily need to. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to take those two little circles and you're going to start kind of working them together. And you're going to do this, might be for kind of a while. Basically, you're just going to go back and forth with them like this until it is one consistent color. Once you've reached that point where it's one consistent color, then we can move on to actually getting it on our base. All right, so there we are. Basically, I've got my consistently colored putty on there. Now we're ready to start getting it applied to our base. What I'm going to use for that is I have these clay shaper sculpting tools here. You can get them on Amazon for super cheap. There's tons of different sizes, different like hardness, softness of the tips and things like that. These are extra firm ones because I use them with both green stuff and Milliput. You don't maybe necessarily need the firm for the Milliput, but the green stuff, it's kind of helpful. But whatever you want to, but honestly, you don't even need these, right? You could just as easily take like, no, that's not a good example. You could just as easily take like the back of an old brush or something like that, or Like I don't know, this is like a grill tong or a shish kebab stick from like your kitchen or something like that. Anything with a decent, like, kind of like rounded point to it'll work just fine. But one of the things that you are going to want to do is whatever it is you're using, you're going to want to get a little bit of water on it. You want to want it damp, because if you don't, then the the putty's just going to stick to it, and you're never going to be able to get it off onto what you're trying to work with. And so then basically what you're going to do is you're just going to take small, like, little bits of it here, and you're just going to kind of place it down and kind of get it, nudged in to the different, like, nooks and crannies around the base, trying to create like an even, uniform surface for it. You don't have to worry about being like crazy neat with it at this point in time. The goal is just to kind of like get it down. We will come back afterwards and kind of get it all like neatened up, cleaned up, uniform, all that nice stuff. But we want to start by just trying to get it like on there and looking decent, so that it's covered with everything, and then we'll come back and make it look pretty. Okay, here is our base with all the milliput put up around it. Let me get it a little bit closer here. Let me get that to focus a little bit. You can see I kind of smoothed out some of the milliput as well. You may ask yourself, well, why? Why would we smooth that out? We're trying to go for like texture and stuff like that. And you're right, you absolutely could leave it rough. The reason I did, I don't know if it's going to be super easy to see here, but you see how there's a little bit of kind of like this gravel texture sculpted into the base already. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and replicate that, I guess, on the rest of this base here. I'm going to do that. I've got here just a piece of like normal kitchen tinfoil. You don't need much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to roll it up into a little ball. And I'm going to kind of get it squeezed together. You can kind of work it against the table if you want to. But what I'm looking for is to try to get it kind of compact so that it's got kind of like all of these little, crinkly bits to it. It's kind of got all of its own texture there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the base and I'm going to gently kind of roll, press, and work it into that milliput to leave some of that texture behind. And go slow with this to start with, because it's way easier to add more texture if you don't feel like you have enough than it will be to go back in and smooth stuff out again if you went a little too gung-ho with it right off the bat. We're just going to kind of work it around like that and get some of that texture from the tinfoil worked in there to try to simulate some of that gravel. All right, when you're happy with that texture on there, then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to let it dry. All right, and let it fully set. According to the packaging, it takes about 3 to 4 hours, so I would, give it at least that much time. I usually will just let it sit overnight, and I'll work on it the next day. All right. If you got some kind of overspill onto the rim of the base here, don't worry about it. What I usually do is just when it's completely dry, I will just go back over the rim of the base itself with some finer grit, like sanding paper, like I've got these sanding sticks here. I'll just kind of go back over it with that, smooth it all out again once it's dry. It's a little bit easier than trying to scrape it off here while it's still workable. All right, so I'm going to let that dry. Get any little other bits that I need to have cleaned up. And then what I will do is I'm going to go ahead and get it primed before we paint it. Now, you don't necessarily have to prime milliput. It actually paints pretty well without any sort of a primer on it. I don't know. One, I just kind of like to have my stuff primed, and two, I have to prime some other stuff anyway. So if I figure if I'm going to break out the materials to do that, I might as well just prime this as well. But that choice is up to So I'm going to let this set, get it primed, and when I come back, we will start to focus on painting it. All right, so now we're back. We've got our base all primed. I've sanded down some of those extras, bits of milliput that got on the side there. And don't worry if there's, we're going to paint over the rim later. So if it's showing a little bit, after you sanded yours, if you had to, it's no big deal. So we got a few different colors we're going to get on here. And unlike some of our other steps where we would do like one base coat and then shade, then highlight, and then move on to the next, we're going to kind of start by getting a lot of these base coats down on here to begin with. So one of the things I'm going to start out with here is all of this masonry that's on top of our base here. And I'm going to do this pretty similar to try to copy how the box art had it done. And so they had kind of a dark gray on there for that stone. So I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of Dungeon Stone gray here from Two Thin Coats, but this would be like Mechanicus Standard gray if you were using Citadel paint. And so basically what I'm going to do here is just come in and we're going to start by getting all of that stone and masonry blocked in with this gray before we move on to our next color, and you don't have to worry about being super neat with it, because we're going to go back in and add some other colors to some areas. So if it overspills a little bit into, some parts that you don't maybe want it to be on, that's totally fine. We can always go back in and get that fixed up a bit later. All right, so there all of our masonry has gotten itself blocked in there. That's looking pretty good. So now we're going to start with some of that like sand and gravel that's all around there. And I want to use a different color in order to kind of contrast with the gray that we already got going on here, right? So I'm going to use this Ancient Forest from Two Thin Coats. If you're using Citadel, I believe it'd be Gorthor Brown. And it's it's just like a medium brown. So you feel free to choose any medium or dark brown you want with this. But the goal is to have a brown on there to contrast with the gray of the stone. So it doesn't look like it's all just one kind of blob of color. And do keep in mind that we are going to shade this using a brown wash. So whatever brown you choose is going to get a little bit darker after we apply that wash to it. So just keep that in mind when you're choosing whatever brown you want to use. But basically I'm just going to go in and I'm going to apply this to all of this, kind of sandy, dirt area around all of the stone there. And you may want to thin it down a little bit more than you might normally do for like a base coat, just because there is so much texture on here that if it's a little bit thinner, it'll run into those like recessed parts of the of the texture a little bit better. You may have to do a few additional coats, but at least you'll have it then kind of in all of those creviced areas. And feel free to switch brushes as you need to as well, because as we get to there's like some of those parts that are kind of in the center of these cracks here that may be a little bit harder to get to if you have a larger brush on. All right, so now we have both of our brown and our gray on there. So next color we're going to work in is to paint this metallic bit here, as well as the few bolter casings and the hilt of this little demonic dagger back here. And we're going to do that using we're going to want to use gold for that. And so we use the same gold we've been using the whole time, which is Proacryl's Rich Gold. But, whichever one you want to use, Liberator Gold, any just sort of like good yellow gold is what we're going for here. Start with. And so just like the rest of our base coats, we just want to take our time to get it on there. Switch the brushes if you need to in order to get at some of those smaller parts, like maybe the bolter casings or whatever it might be. And it is a little bright right now, but that's okay because we're going to kind of tone it down a little bit and get it to fit in with the base a little bit better when we do some of that shading. So just work on getting that kind of nice and covered on there to begin with. One last bit that I want to note on here is the blade of this little dagger that we got going on here. which I'm going to base coat real quick using some gunmetal from the Army Painter, but you could use, lead belcher from Citadel or just any other dark kind of silver that you wanted to use. So just going to go in and kind of quickly and carefully get that base coated. I believe it's the only silver I plan on using for the base here. So we'll just get that on there real quick, and then we can move on to washing. Okay, now that we've got all of our base coats on there, we can go ahead and chuck our wash on to give it all some shading, some definition. And I know a lot of times when we would do the mini, we would do like different shades or different wash colors for each of the different elements, right? Like Ray would have maybe black, and we maybe use flesh shade for the gold. But for this base, I'm going to go over everything with one color, and that's going to be a brown. And I have two reasons for this. The one is, this is a battlefield scene that he's on, right? So like all of this stuff would have been broken and fallen into the mud and the dirt and the dust and everything like that. So it makes sense in my mind that it would be grimy, it would be dirty. So that's kind of where the use of the just getting everything covered in the brown wash comes for me. The second is I feel like by using one wash, it's going to help tie everything together and make it seem like this is like one scene that this base is from, rather than a bunch of different separate elements that are in there to make up the thing. So I have Battle Mud Wash here. It's from Two Thin Coats. But Agrax Earthshade or whatever other brown wash you normally like to make use of would be perfectly fine. And because we're going over everything, I'm going to use a fairly large brush with it, right? And then just start applying it all over every part of the miniature. Couple of parts that I do want to make sure, is when we're doing like these upper portions here, I don't want to let it pool too much on these flat areas, because then that's going to kind of create some like unwanted tide markings and things like that. And we are going to go back in and layer over some of this on the flat areas to bring the gray back a little bit further. But just like the less like kind of heavy pooling we have in those areas, the easier that is going to be when we go back to do the layering. The other part that I want to talk about is what I'm going to do with this kind of gold broken chaos star we have here. So basically what I'm going to do is I want it to get darker down towards the bottom. So I'm going to start partway up, and I'm going to start by just kind of pushing it all the way down towards the bottom. And then once it's all, that first layer is all fully dry, I'm going to go back in and apply more of it, starting even further down, and kind of keep working down. So the closer that we get to the mud at the bottom, the darker that gold is there. All right. And so I'm just going to kind of go work my way around until I've got wash on everything. And because we're applying such a large amount of wash on this, we are going to need to give it probably a little bit of extra time to dry. So I would recommend maybe, giving it a good, 30, 45 minutes minimum to ensure that it's really fully dry before we move on to the next section of painting this. Okay, so now that we have all of that shading on there and it's had a chance to fully dry, what I'm going to do is return and do just a little bit of layering, but I'm really only going to do it to the gray stone, and I'm only going to do it to the flattest areas. So like kind of these flat upper areas here, I'm not going to do anything with these kind of areas on the side. I'm going to leave those as being darker. But just to clean it up just a little bit, I am going to bring some of that original Dungeon Stone Gray or Mechanicus Standard Gray, whichever one you were using, whatever our base color was, back, and I'm going to reapply it to some of these flat upper areas just to clean it up a little bit. right, so now that we're done layering, we're going to move into doing some highlighting here, and we're going to do that primarily by using some dry brushing to start with. So we're going to work on our gray. I grabbed a light gray here, Carcharodon gray, 2 thin coats, Administratum gray, whatever you wanted to use, but basically as long as it's just a very light gray. And to dry brush that, I'm going to grab a little bit on my brush from my palette, and I'm not using a wet palette for this. And then I'm going to take my tissue paper and I'm going to work that into the bristles, until I get down to a point where there's not very much paint left in those bristles as I work them in. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Mini, and on the areas I want, I'm just going to real lightly back and forth flick my brush across those areas until some of that color of that highlight starts to pick up on there. We're going to go ahead and we're going to do that for all of the gray portions of the base. And then there are going to be a few sections where I am going to go in and do more of a traditional edge highlight, but we will cover that once all of the dry brushing is done. All right, there you can see that dry brushed gray on there. And I did mention that we're going to do just a little bit of traditional edge highlighting with that gray. So with that same Carcharodon gray, what I want to do is I'm going to go in and just do a little bit of like what we would consider standard edge highlighting on just a couple of spots. One is going to be this demonic kind of face that's been worked into the stone, where I kind of want to come in and I'm just going to pick out like some of those facial features to make it a little like the face stand out just that little bit more. Okay. Also on there on the horns, there are these little ridges that run up along the horn towards the top, and I want to go in and just pick out those ridges there to give them a little bit more definition. Okay. The other spot where I'm going to do a little bit of edge highlighting is around all of these various runes that are on the stone, these chaos runes. So what I'm going to do is just come in just like we did on that sword when we were painting it, and I'm just going to give it a quick edge highlight around the outside there so that they stand out more to the eye. This is totally optional. If you like how it looks after just the dry brush goes on and you want to just keep it there, that's totally fine. Paint it however you feel as though it looks best to you. This is just an additional option that you can add if you want to give it just a little bit more. Okay, now that we have our gray highlighted, we're going to move on next, trying to get some highlights on the kind of brown gravel we have there. I'm going to use a slightly lighter brown for this, so my choice would be Wasteland Brown. This would also be Baneblade Brown. And we're going to again apply it by dry brush, get just a little bit of it on there, and we're going to work that into our tissue paper, or paper towel, whatever it is you're using, whatever you call it, until there's almost nothing left on the brush. And then we're going to come in and very lightly brush this over the top of our kind of graveled brown areas. And I'm only really going to focus on what's kind of outside the rim here. I'm not going to work on trying to like dig into the center of the stones there, because then what's going to happen is I'm just going to wind up with like kind of a mess on top of my gray. And next, we are going to highlight all of our gold. We are going to start with that same light bronze that we've been using from previous iterations when we've highlighted our gold details. And this one we're just going for a straight, simple edge highlight along all the parts of our various gold details. So be that the kind of chaos star here, just going and kind of running that along the edges. What this will do too is it will kind of bring a little bit of shine back to the gold that we dulled down when we put that wash on there, but it will not be, so it will kind of like remind people when they look at it that like, oh yeah, that is metal, that's something that would shine, but it's not so intense as to detract from the fact that this metal would be like, oh hey, this is dirty metal. Also, we want to kind of keep it subdued like that so that the base does not draw attention away from the rest of the miniature. While you're doing that highlighting, also don't forget that we're gonna kind of hit up the bolter casings that we have on the model here. Get those back and kind of looking good. And then also we've got this dagger hilt on the back end here. This is kind of demon dagger. So we're gonna come in and pick out some of the edges on that as well. Alright, so there's that gold with the highlight applied. Now we have just a couple more real quick highlighting steps. The first is going to be to add a bright silver to the blade of that little demonic dagger that's hanging out in the bottom part of the base there. So I took a little bit of mithril blade, but this would also be like Stormhost silver if you wanted to use that. And we're going to apply just a little bit of it down the edges of the blade. Let's just run it along the edges and any other portions of the blade to draw a little bit more attention to. The only other thing I'm going to do with this silver is I'm going to take just a very small amount of it and edge highlight it just up to the peaks of these arrows on the star here, right? Just to really accentuate them. And then I'm going to take just a small amount, and again, this is also totally optional, and we're just going to put it onto the rivets that are sticking out there. Okay. There we go. Our silver is now highlighted, and so I have just one final optional highlight step that we're going to do, and that is that I'm going to take a very light bone color, so some Vampire Fang or some Screaming Skull or something like that, and I'm going to return to that dry brush. I'm going to get just a little bit of it on there, and I'm going to work like almost all of it out of the brush until there's basically nothing on there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to very, very lightly dry brush this over all of the non-metallic sections of our base. And this, much like the using the same wash for everything, is going to have the effect of trying to just tie everything together that little bit more by putting that same highlight color into all these aspects of the base. But super, super lightly I mean, for the most part, on the gray, it may be barely visible as being there. Okay. But just a little something extra. Totally optional. And now, one final detail to take care of is going to be painting. There's a little tiny eye, like demon eye, in the center of that dagger's hilt, and we're going to take care of that next. Alright, so the first step on that eye was to take some black and just kind of clean up that whole little interior there around the whole thing. This is also going to serve as our recess shade as well. And then I'm going to take kind of a yellowish green or greenish yellow, however you want to describe it. So that's ethereal green for me, moot green. If you were using Citadel or something else of the like, would be a good one as well. And I'm going to take that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint it over that whole surface of the eye, except for the very outer reaches, leaving some of that black in the recess. Once we're happy with how the green looks on there, we're going to return to our black. We're going to paint that pupil into the center of the eye. And I apologize if this is going to be kind of hard to see on camera. It's a very small detail. But what I would do is kind of pick a spot in the center of the eye. Start by drawing a bit of a line down there, like that. And then you could either A, leave it like that, so it's kind of got like a slitted eye, or you can then work on kind of widening it out a little bit to look more like a standard pupil. Choice is yours. All right, I did go in and widen out that black to make a slightly larger pupil on mine. And I did add one more detail, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know if you're even going to be able to see it on the camera, but let's find out. Is I did go in and took a pure white and added just a little dot right in the center of the eye, just to give it a little bit more of a, I guess you could call it kind of a focal point, but that is totally optional, not something you have to do at all. So, that is basically our base complete. So there is our finished base. I am going to go and get the rim painted, and realistically you can paint the rim in any color you choose to. That is totally up to you. I'm going to go with black just because that's what I always use. But really, whatever you want to do. And after that point, I'm going to get Castellan Crowe put onto our base, and then we will come back and we will have a look at our finished product. Castellan Crowe is now finished and ready to fight the forces of chaos in the name of the Grey Knights, the Imperium of Man, and the God Emperor. I want to thank you all for following along on this video series. I had a lot of fun painting this model, and I hope you enjoyed the videos. And hopefully some of the techniques or recipes that I covered throughout this series were of some use to you in your own painting. Please let me know in the comments your thoughts about the series, what you liked, what I can improve, and maybe what you would like to see next. I have a few ideas for future videos, but if there is a particular model you'd like me to cover, or maybe a specific painting technique I could go into more depth on, let me know and I'd be happy to put something together. If you like the videos and would like notification when I publish more, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot to me, and those likes and subscribes help me hopefully reach a larger audience. Also, feel free to check out my Instagram, which is @SamsMiniWorkshop, for more painting content, and I'll post some more videos and photos of this model on there as well. I hope to see you all next time, and until then, I hope you have fun painting.